One Piece chapter 939 came and went, and it left us with several things to ponder and discuss. Simply put, I think Wano is going to be an unexpected arc in which we expected great battles and then ended up getting amazing information. So far, the information about the Sea Stone Craftsman, Poneglyphs, and just the interest in Vegapunk has me intrigued. We also can't rule out the actual Smile Devil Fruits, which people normally forget because the designs are so trash, but these are fake Devil Fruits. If they managed to harness the power of a Logia, that would be insane. We've already seen it a bit with the Pacifistas and Kizaru's Devil Fruit, but we would like to see it harnessed in a Devil Fruit after you eat it being a Smile Fruit. Regardless, the most recent chapter gave us information on things we had questions about for a while now. Obviously, Future Sight is a major talking point, but we're going to park that for now and focus on Goken, the technique Grandpa Hio used versus Alpaca Man in the chapter. So, if you're here for the first time, make sure to subscribe and like the video. And without further ado, let's talk about Goken and the breath of all things. Okay, so when I think about Goken, and again, this is what we're calling it based on the manga stream translation, which is somewhat ironic because we literally don't use manga stream for anything until it suits us. But whatever, Goken seems to be a technique-based attack which has to be learned and mastered for it to be effective. To be clear, the Viz translation didn't call it this, but it's just easier to distinguish it by calling it Goken, or the process of transferring this energy Goken. So essentially for this video, Goken is the process of transferring your energy from yourself to your blade, weapon, whatever. I covered this technique for the most part in my Understanding Advanced Haki video, which will be linked below. But with this new information, there are more things to discuss as well as other instances in the story in which this technique could have been used. This is the topic of discussion from this chapter because of Grandpa Hio, in which he says this is related to his ability to transfer an invisible power from your body to your weapon, in his case, a sword. He then mentions that through this ability, when one wants to cut even the thickest of steel, they can. And on the other hand, if they aren't interested in cutting the thinness of paper, they won't. This is the ultimate control, and with this, the sword becomes one with the sword master or user or whatever. With this information, it immediately made you think of a situation previously in the story. Mr. One versus Zoro. This is where we get the information in the story about the breath of all things. Zoro was initially struggling with Mr. One due to the fact that he couldn't cut steel. After being somewhat at his wit's end, he remembered a moment in which his master Koshiro, who is obviously Kuina's dad, in which he mentions being able to cut steel whilst also being unable to cut paper. Of course, this is what is used to tie in what Hio said to this moment. It's several interesting things to point out to better understand this technique or power. First off, with Goken and the breath of all things, are these two separate things or one and the same? Versus Mr. One, Zoro also used this ability to dodge rocks that were falling and was hearing the breath of all the things around him. Hio explained this technique as an apparatus to transfer invisible energy from your body to a sword. The first order of business is to figure out exactly what the breath of all things is and how it ties into what Hio was doing along with what Zoro was doing. The immediate notion is that these things are derivatives or variants of the two main forms of Haki. I say two due to the color of the conqueror not being as prevalent. So as a variant of observation and armament, it is difficult to place this mode or state in one category. The mode or state of the breath of all things was brought on by almost being defeated by Mr. One. However, Zoro does indicate that he had that feeling before. We have not seen that on screen, but Zoro had experienced this before, so it was somewhat a familiar feeling. After being cut by Mr. One, he left rocks to fall on Zoro, and Zoro knew where these rocks would fall because he could sense the breath of the things around him. At some point, we have to deduce the difference between the breath of all things and the voice of all things, but I guess at first we have to figure out exactly what the breath of all things is. After this, Zoro then conveyed his will to his blade and attempted to cut a branch and a rock. The branch was not cut because he didn't want it to. The rock was cut because he did. The sword listened to the will of the master, as Hio mentioned something similar, with the sword becoming one with the sword master. So what does all this mean? The thing about the breath of all things is that I believe there are two phases to it. The phase of deduction, which Zoro uses versus Mr. One, and this is a variant of observation which Zoro is able to pinpoint and understand a weakness in everything around him. Then having his blade succumb to his will, he then understood what it would take to cut whatever it was in front of him. So essentially, the breath of all things is not only figuring out the things around you, but also yourself. This is going to be the process of growing as a powerful warrior, which is the process of figuring out the weakness of an opponent and taking advantage of that. With the breath of all things to distinguish this, in unison with one's blade to embody your will, if it is strong enough, anything can be cut. I expect this will be the mode or technique that Zoro will use if cutting diamond is ever the goal. To somewhat wrap this up, I think it's important to also say that Goken is not the breath of all things. These are two different things that can be used well together. Grandpa Hyo mentions transferring what we assume to be Haki to a blade and also becoming one with the sword. The act of transferring this energy we're calling Goken and deducing things around you as well as making your sword succumb to your will could be considered the breath of all things. So used together, this is a complete technique in which you figure out exactly what the opponent is going to do, and then by transferring your will to your sword, already understanding the breath of whatever you're trying to cut, it's a simple technique. Advanced in nature for sure, but simple. I think we should think of the breath of all things as a hyper-focused state in which you not only understand the composition and will of your own power and weapons, but also the things around you, alive or inanimate. It seems the best way to learn the technique that was used by Sentomaru, Rayleigh, and the Admirals is to practice transferring Haki to a weapon or something else. And once that's mastered, without the weapon, try to transfer energy as a burst, and that would be similar to what the others did. It's not necessarily more powerful than regular Haki. It's just a very useful technique. Let's go back to how the anime showed Zoro transferring Haki to his blade. It was an unusual searing energy around his blade the entire time. This is more than likely the first step of mastering Goken. This technique is meant to impact Devil Fruit users and alike because it would be an Haki-filled energy blast. With the new revelations of this technique and the explanation we received from Grandpa Hyo, it took us back to several instances in the story in which it could have been possibly used. One of the most thought of was Sabo and his dragon-based attacks. If you remember in chapter 743 before Sabo destroyed the Colosseum, he mentions that everything has a core at the heart of it, which confused Bartolomeo, which obviously would mean he has no idea what the hell Sabo was talking about. Again, with the breath of all things and Goken, the breath of all things is used to deduce the will and weakness of the intended object or adversary, while Goken is transferring the will or energy to that object or adversary. Sabo did exactly that. Interestingly enough, Sabo uses dragon breath to completely destroy the ring with minimal effort. This is more than likely Goken incorporated into his dragon techniques. He even mentioned to Bastille that he could crush his skull at any time, but only decided to destroy his mask. That shows control as well. Another instance was Big Mom opening the room with the poneglyphs. In my opinion, she showed Goken in that instance as well. There's also a bit more here to unpack because it showed a purple aura which goes with her devil fruit typically, and that would be great if you could infuse your devil fruit powers with Goken. So as you're transferring Haki, you infuse it with your devil fruit, and then the blast that comes out would have properties from your devil fruit. For instance, Luffy learning this would be able to have rubber properties with this technique and could lead to awakening, which from what we've seen is transferring your devil fruit power to your surroundings. With the showing and knowing what we know now, this could also explain Big Mom's quote-unquote iron balloon body. Big Mom is always protected in some way by invisible Haki, and this more than likely proves that Big Mom is most adept in the color of arms. Interestingly enough, there are a few moments of possible Goken being used on Punk Hazard. First is Virgo's insane Haki control to transfer Haki to his bamboo stick and maintain a composition of such while doing an attack. Not necessarily Goken, but the Haki control and usage here would be possible for Goken. Another clear indication of not Goken, but the breath of all things you could say, and just commanding the sword and make it adhere to your will is Zoro versus Monet. Zoro launches an attack, it hits Monet, and when Zoro actually intimidates Monet for her not to move and then goes to slash her, he doesn't cut her at all. So this shows, for one, Zoro cut her when he wanted to, and then when he didn't want to, he didn't cut her at all. The last moment that one could say that could possibly be Goken is Virgo versus Law. This has been argued to death, everything that transpired between Law and Virgo, due to the fact that Law had Haki and a devil fruit and Virgo had Haki. Now Doflamingo even stated that Virgo's Haki was on another level to Law, but Law still managed to split Virgo in half, not only Virgo, the factory as well as the mountain. The default answer is that Virgo underestimated Law and that Doflamingo had no idea how strong Law's Haki was, but what if Law at this point used a similar technique to Zoro? Of course, there was no indication of this, so this is completely headcanon. However, Law does use a sword, and in this moment, Law wanted to cut Virgo and needed to cut Virgo. This goes back to your sword understanding your will and carrying it out. Granted, the simple explanation could be Virgo underestimated Law, Law's Haki was stronger than Virgo along with his chopping ability. However, just think about what if Law used a similar technique to overcome Virgo. Using the breath of all things, Goken, his chopping ability, and Haki, of course Virgo at that point would stand no chance. With that being said, that's pretty much all I have to say on the topic. If there are other instances of Goken or invisible power that you can think of, please put it in the comment section down below. What do you think Goken is? What do you think the breath of all things is? Leave your comments down below. Make sure to like and for sure subscribe, and I'll catch you guys later. Peace.
Okay, One Piece chapter 937 happened, and we received some more information, or I suppose you can call it confirmation, on some of the things we knew or theorized about Haki. Haki is usually such a cumbersome topic just because it's all over the place, literally. Typically when something different or weird happens in the verse, one assumes it's Haki.